Chapter 181, In a Flash. Poplar Beach noticed it just now, but it was already too late. His opponent had already thrown out a grenade. The timing was perfect. The shock wave from the explosion launched his Blade Master even higher into the air as Chasing Haze picked up her Rose Flower Cannon. Seeing his opponent move like this, Poplar Beach finally realized throwing down the Rose Flower Cannon was one of the opponent's ploys. Chasing Haze crouched and swung the Rose Flower Cannon back onto her shoulder. Blue light began to accumulate at the mouth of the cannon. Poplar Beach moved his camera to look down. Just before his character hit the ground, the stored blue light shot out and a brilliant blue artillery shell flew directly at him. X1 Extruder. Poplar Beach realized that his opponent's crouch and swing wasn't without meaning. The crouch reduced the time needed to put the cannon onto her shoulder. It also let him shoot from a lower height, making it so that the X1 Extruder would hit him just as he was about to land on the ground. X1 Extruder's feature was that it would vacuum in enemies that were hit by it, restricting their movements. The enemies would then fly forward along with it and then explode when it hit the ground, knocking the enemies to the ground along with it. Poplar Beach didn't have any way of avoiding this vacuum effect. This time, damage would be certain. Just as he was calculating what he would do next to counterattack, he suddenly saw his opponent raise his hand and snap his fingers. Poplar Beach was startled. This wasn't a random movement. This was the casting animation for a launcher's heat-seeking missile. The finger snap would bring up a crosshair. The final position of the crosshair would direct where the missile would land. The attack did tons of damage, but the weakness of it was obvious. For one, the crosshair had to be accurate. However, the main weakness was that it was extremely slow. Poplar Beach decided he would do the same as with the quantum bomb and slice it apart. In midair, a sword light flashed forward. Sword draw was executed towards the missile. This move had been used in that match between Excellent Era and 301. Team 301's Blade Master player Gao Jia had done this to dissolve the heat-seeking missile. Poplar Beach's situation was similar to Gao Jia's situation. Both of them acted in midair. However, Poplar Beach wasn't as skilled as a pro player. Poplar Beach could only pray that his sword draw would hit the target. Please hit. Seeing the flying slash's direction and the missile's arc, Poplar Beach determined that they would collide and a surge of happiness immediately washed over him. But who would have thought that at this moment, an explosion would suddenly ring out? Sword Slash's sword aura had been exploded into 3 sparks. Poplar Beach was startled. He looked over at Chasing Haze and saw gentle smoke drift out from the mouth of the cannon. *T. Poplar Beach's sword slash had been deflected by his opponent's anti-tank missile. The flying heat-seeking missile flew towards him. Poplar Beach felt a chill in his heart. He knew that his difficult maneuver had been done out of luck, but what about his opponent? The bright crosshair finally found its target. A loud boom sounded out from up above in the sky and a heat-seeking missile descended down. Poplar Beach began to fall. He had no way of immediately using quick recover. He hadn't been launched in a normal way, he had been sucked in by X1 Extruder. The crosshair, Poplar Beach, and the suction from the X1 Extruder together let the heat-seeking missile arrive and a large mushroom cloud leapt into the air. But things weren't done yet. Poplar Beach, who had been forced tumbling in the air from the shock wave, saw a large laser beam shoot down, the gunner's ultimate, satellite beam. Poplar Beach had eaten all of the launcher's high damage skills. Poplar Beam was still tumbling from the explosion and light of the satellite beam. Yi Shu used this time to quickly throw out a few more skills. The spectators watched dumbstruck as explosions continued to chain together, reaching a 77 combo. The light from explosions receded. The smoke dispersed. Poplar Beach had already been defeated. Starting from when he was launched into the air by that knee strike to the instant he landed on the ground, he wasn't able to find any opportunity to counter-attack. In that span of 5 seconds, how many skills had hit him? The spectators had to count on their fingers to work it out. Everyone saw the result. Poplar Beach had been defeated. Defeated. He really had been defeated. In just an instant, the long health bar had been washed clean. The spectators weren't even able to type. They were completely dumbstruck. Chen Guo was also staring blankly at the computer screen. She was already standing because Yi Shu had thrown her rose flower cannon. She was just about to go over and kill the guy. However, her rose flower cannon had been picked back up, and in the blink of an eye, the opponent had turned into a corpse. All of this happened as she jumped up from her seat. Chen Guo finally saw how Yi Shu was able to beat an opponent in a few seconds using her chasing haze. Chen Guo had never thought that her chasing haze had the burst power to explode someone to death in one go. Moreover, the person who had died was a famous expert in the heavenly domain. Chen Guo felt a surge of excitement. She had originally wanted to go and strangle Yi Shu to death, but now she couldn't move. She didn't know how to describe what she was feeling. Poplar Beach's corpse quickly disappeared. The experienced gamers knew that this person had already left the room. What could Poplar Beach say now? The arrogant him had been completely shut up. There was nothing he could say. He realized that Lord Grimm's words weren't a provocation, but a reality. 1 round, it really was 1 round. He completely recognized the gap between their skill. To lose so quickly and tragically, this wasn't a question of whether it was luck. The match ended so quickly that the spectators had overlooked another reality. This was a perfect match. Chasing Haze hadn't suffered any damage. Once Chasing Haze left the room as well, the room was naturally dissolved and the spectators were kicked back into the lobby. But everyone was still in shock and were still circling about. Only Yi Shu didn't care. He took off his headphones and turned his head. Boss, you can have your account back. Huh? Chen Guo was also one of those who were dumbstruck. Did you record it? Chen Guo suddenly turned her head to ask Tang Ru. Tang Ru laughed bitterly. You were the one controlling it. Everyone had already left the room. How could she still have the chance to record it? Chen Guo felt regretful. It would have been such a great video. It was something she could watch 100 times. Chen Guo felt depressed. She suddenly discovered something amiss. She looked around and discovered that a few people were looking at her. What are you looking at? Chen Guo wasn't very polite. The people looking at her were frequent customers, so they knew each other. She hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, so what were they all looking at? Boss, you're so fierce, someone suddenly said. What? Chen Guo stared blankly. Chasing Haze, someone else shouted. What? Chasing Haze? Where? Where? Another person jumped up. This time it was a customer Chen Guo didn't recognize. Chen Guo instantly understood. This duel had been seen by some in the internet cafe. Among those were a few who didn't know that Lord Grimm was a manager at this internet cafe, but they did know that Chen Guo's glory character was Chasing Haze. After that, they thought that Lord Grimm was actually Chen Guo. And those unfamiliar customers obviously didn't know anything. They just heard someone in the internet cafe speak up about it, so they immediately looked for her and crowded around her. Chen Guo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She looked around, but didn't know where Yi Shu had slipped away to. She could helplessly cry out, that wasn't me. Someone else borrowed my account, and then hastily ran off. The customers all stared blankly. They didn't say anything else. The crowd was just there to satisfy their curiosity. In reality, most of the glory players that knew Chen Guo knew what her skill level was. It was just that the previous match had been too surprising. Poplar Beach. All the veterans knew who he was. And thus, saying that someone had borrowed the account was very reasonable. There weren't many who both recognized Chen Guo's account and watched the match, so there wasn't too much commotion. Everyone went back to the game to discuss about it in private. This match was too quick. Not only was the course of events quick, even the room had been dissolved quickly, making it so that there wasn't any place for everyone to talk about it. After the players left the arena, they immediately began discussing it in the World Channel. In a short moment, a single topic conquered the 10th server World Channel. Lord Grimm, Chasing Haze, Launcher, threw down his weapon, instant kill, etc. These were all keywords. The match was too frightening, making it so that everyone was concentrated on the one who was victorious. At this moment, Poplar Beach was like a pitiful backdrop. Very few people mentioned him. There were a few new players who didn't really understand. They obviously didn't know how incredible Poplar Beach's background was. They just saw that he had been instantly defeated, so they wanted to mock him. But their mockery was actually met with others' mockery. Who won and who lost the match wasn't because one side was weak, but rather because the other side was too strong. In everyone's eyes, this was the impression they got. Of course, no one felt that Poplar Beach's loss was dignified. However, his defeat wasn't the main point everyone was talking about. Chasing Haze, so strong. Launchers, so strong. Lord Grimm, so strong. These were the main points. Chapter 182, Consultation. The match was beautiful and the reaction to it was massive. But to the big guilds, its impact wasn't as great as the record that had been set in Desolate Land. The big guilds recognized the result and talked about it for a bit. However, there was no way it would be put above Bluebrook Guild's tarnished image. The only ones who were truly concerned over the match was Bluebrook Guild. Currently, the 10th server's Bluebrook Guild was completely silent. Everyone silently watched the discussion go on in the World Channel. Don't look at how the highest among them were only level 33. The people behind those characters, the senior players in Bluebrook Guild like Changing Spring, were all there. However, Poplar Beach wasn't there. After he had left the arena, he directly logged out of the Heavenly Domain, but didn't log into his 10th server account. Even if he was arrogant, right now, he felt too ashamed to meet other guild members. Lowering Poplar Beach's arrogance might have been the only reward that Bluebrook Guild received. However, seeing the situation in front of them, Lord Grimm's strength was too ridiculous. It was quite possible that Poplar Beach might have been hurt too much from this match. Which of you went and watched it? Changing Spring asked. Whenever they talked about guild matters, Changing Spring usually had the characters find a place to meet up at. The reason was because their guild leader Changing Spring really wasn't fond of typing. I watched it. Blue River let out a sigh as he spoke. What did you think of it? Pretty much identical to how the World Channel is describing it. They're not exaggerating, because there's really isn't any way to exaggerate it, Blue River said. This Lord Grimm really didn't leave us with anything, Flying Brushstroke said. I think it's the exact opposite. I think the way he did things actually left us with room to recover, Blue River said. If you take a look at the World Channel, most of them are discussing about how strong Lord Grimm was. There was not anything else being talked about. To us, these results aren't too bad. Sigh, Changing Spring also sighed. This Lord Grimm really isn't easy to deal with. After our dungeon record was beaten, all the popularity we had recovered dropped again. Today, the number of players who wanted to join our guild fell by 70%, Blue River said. Line Canyon, isn't that the one we said we wouldn't fight tyrannical ambition over? Changing Spring asked. Yeah. Then it looks like the only thing we can do for now is endure, Changing Spring said somewhat regretfully. That Bound Boat had also come to the meeting. In the 10th server, he was second only to Blue River. However, everyone present at the moment were all the seniors in the Heavenly Domain. As a result, Bound Boat clearly seemed smaller. His words also seemed like they were hesitant. Oh, Bound Boat, what do you have in mind? Changing Spring asked. He knew the important players they had sent over to Pioneer. Maybe we can ask the teams to help us? Even though these are only low-level dungeons, which of the current 10th server records are achievable for us? Not just Lord Grimm's records, but that Frost Forest record set by Excellent Dynasty as well. Fortunately, these were made in the new servers. If these were made in the old servers, then these records would have been suspected of being set by pros a long time ago. No, Bound Boat said. In the 10th server, there were only records for Frost Forest, Boneyard, and Desolate Land. However, it was just like how Bound Boat had described it. The 3 records were all records that surpassed their limits. Changing Spring and the others were all at the top of the normal players, yet even they were crushed by Lord Grimm's team. This was a clear and terrifying reality. Where exactly did these guys come from? The background of Lord Grimm and these others couldn't be small. The word pro level began to spiral around their minds. That's why I say we should look for the experts in the team to help us appraise them, Bound Boat said. This suggestion truly is quite good, Changing Spring nodded his head. They weren't asking them to substitute. They were only asking to chat with the club's experts on these incredible records and request for an appraisal. That wouldn't be difficult to do. All right then. I'm going to go and ask. Changing Spring decided on this. The people who were participating in the meeting all had weird expressions on their faces. For the pioneering in the new server to be so shocking that they even needed pro players to come out, this was something they had never even dreamed of before. If they knew that the entire champion team Tiny Herb had come to the 10th server for training, their blood pressure would probably shoot up. I'll be leaving first then, Changing Spring informed everyone. He was also someone who handled things straightforwardly. After logging out, Changing Spring looked at the time. Right now, the team should be doing their afternoon practice. Changing Spring ran the Blue Brook Guild in glory in place of Club Blue Rain. He was just like Chen Yahui in excellent era. He could be considered as one of the club's official staff members, so he had some say in the club's matters. Changing Spring often came to the team to look around, so he wouldn't be considered unfamiliar with the pro players. He'd sometimes even have the chance to compare notes with the team members. Of course, if the pro players wanted to play 2 rounds with him for fun, Changing Spring wouldn't refuse. However, if he went actively look for pro players to play with him, he would be suspected of wasting their time. Changing Spring understood this. Changing Spring calculated the time and chose to go at a suitable time. He didn't have too many restrictions when walking around in the club. Besides going to the tech team who researched self-made equipment, there wasn't anywhere he wasn't allowed to go to. Hi Senior Chun. Changing Spring had chosen a good time. He arrived just as Team Blue Rain finished practice, a time when everyone was relaxing. When he appeared in front of the entrance, someone saw him and greeted him. Changing Spring's real name was Liang Yichun, so the people who were familiar with him called him Senior Chun. Hi, Changing Spring waved his hands at the pro player that greeted him. The pro player was a guy called Li Yuan. He was a new player in Blue Rain. He wasn't as cautious and careful like the majority of new players were. After the young guy joined the team, he was extremely energetic and was always very friendly with everyone. He quickly became familiar with everyone including Changing Spring. With his greeting, the other pros who hadn't known that Changing Spring had come turned their heads and looked at him. The majority of the pros nodded their heads as a greeting and then went back to doing whatever they were doing before. However, Yu Wenzhou got up and walked over to him. Senior Chun's come over. Yeah, I'm here to take a look, Changing Spring said politely. Yu Wenzhou, Team Blue Rain's team captain. Most of the team captains were also the team's ace player, but there would obviously be a few exceptions. Blue Rain's ace player was Huang Shaoshan, but their team captain was Yu Wenzhou. Even though Yu Wenzhou's mechanics weren't as good as Huang Shaoshan's, his ability in strategy and tactics were extraordinary. Moreover, that Huang Shaoshan's constant chatter pulled down his demeanor. The words of someone who was always talking would feel somewhat frivolous to others. You haven't been here in a while. Yu Wenzhou treated him politely as well, seeing that Changing Spring had come to talk with him about something. Changing Spring also knew that Team Blue Rain's captain was relatively easy to speak with, unlike tyrannical ambitions Zhang Yu, who was so hesitant. If Blue Rain's captain had been so fierce like Han Wenqing, he definitely wouldn't have immediately logged offline to go look for him. Yeah, I've been busy. The pioneering in the 10th server, Changing Spring began to ease into the topic. It's just pioneering. As if you needed to personally lead, right? Yu Wenzhou chuckled. He knew how the club's guild operated in general. But this time's 10th server is too different, Changing Spring said very seriously. Oh, what do you mean? A bunch of experts suddenly popped up out of nowhere. All of the low-level dungeon records that have been set in the 10th server so far are above the all-time records. It looks as if they were all done by pro players, Changing Spring said. Crash! A loud crash resounded in the practice room, along with 3 or 4 players crying out in alarm. Huang Xiao, are you okay? What happened? It's nothing. It's nothing. I slipped, that's all, Huang Shaoshan said ashen-faced as he supported himself up with his chair. Seeing that Changing Spring was looking at him in astonishment, he hastily waved his hand. Senior Chun, you're here. Ha ha ha, long time no see. You're free today? Have you eaten yet? You probably haven't eaten, right? Lucky you. It'll be time to eat soon. You should eat some food before you go. Sure, Changing Spring repeatedly nodded his head. He didn't dare say anything too much or else he wouldn't hear the end of it. Do you have a 10th server account card? Let's take a look at the records, Yu Wenzhou said. I do. Changing Spring took out a card and gave it to Yu Wenzhou. Of course he had prepared everything beforehand. Yu Wenzhou found a random computer to sit down at and logged into the game. At the same time, without turning his head, he also said, Shaoshan, you should come and look too. There wasn't any response from behind him. Huang Shaoshan was wearing his headphones, acting as if he hadn't heard anything. The players beside him pushed him. Huang Xiao, captain's calling for you. Ah, what is it? Huang Shaoshan took off his headphones and turned around to ask. Come over here to look at the 10th server records, Yu Wenzhou said. Huang Shaoshan had no choice but to get up. As he walked over, he asked, 10th server. The new server. What's there to look at? Whoa, the records really are incredible. Yu Wenzhou had already entered the game and directly clicked on the record leaderboards. Shaoshan, how do you think these records were made? Yu Wenzhou asked. Chapter 183, Blue Rain Team Captain. After looking at the leaderboards for each of the 3 dungeons, Yu Wenzhou turned his head to ask Huang Shaoshan. Huang Shaoshan stood behind him. He lifted his hand to scratch his chin and shook head. I haven't played these dungeons for so long, so I can't tell just by looking at the time. Do you recognize any of the players who set the record? Is there anything special about them? Do you know what their classes and equipment are? Huang Shaoshan said to Changing Spring. Oh, the key player is Lord Grimm. Changing Spring pointed at the name that appeared in all 3 leaderboards. Among these, Frost Forest was ranked 2nd on its leaderboard, while Boneyard and Desolate Land were number 1 on their respective leaderboards. What about this person? Huang Shaoshan asked. This player's character hasn't changed classes. He's an unspecialized character. In addition, the weapon in his hands is really weird. It can change into other weapon forms and use low-leveled skills from all sorts of classes. Changing Spring said. There was no way to hide the myriad manifestation umbrella, which was why Yishu never bothered to conceal it. Experts like Blue River, who had seen him in action, had already seen through what it was. Oh, so such a weapon exists. Yu Wenzhou heard this and his interest rose by quite a bit. Before, he had a general idea of why Changing Spring had come, so he was just being polite. But now these words had grabbed his attention. This type of weapon is definitely self-made. It sounds like it was made specially for unspecialized characters, Huang Shaoshan said. Unspecialized, Yu Wenzhou clearly knew about this type of playing style. If this is true, then this weapon really would be able to let an unspecialized fully utilize his strengths. The early unspecialized characters were weighed down because switching weapons had a cooldown, which made it so that there were a lot of flaws whenever they tried to combo. They weren't able to perfectly link together all of the many low-leveled skills. But with this weapon, this issue is solved. Plus, if it has silver weapon attributes, then the damage output would be even greater than orange weapons. With a character like this in a team, then their damage output would naturally be a grade higher than the usual teams. This player really is the key character, Huang Shaoshan said. Yu Wenzhou nodded his head, clearly showing that he agreed with what Huang Shaoshan said. He then looked at the other members in Lord Grimm's teams. What about the others? These 3 are fixed members in Lord Grimm's teams. One of them is a battle mage, one is a launcher, and there's also a brawler. Their skill levels are quite high. The other spot doesn't seem to be fixed. In Frost Forest, this player is from Tyrannical Ambition. In Boneyard, this flowing tree is a blade master. At the time, he joined our Blue Brook Guild. He never said anything and then never went online again after setting that record. Finally, this 1-inch Ash appeared recently, so we don't really know much about him. Quote. What about this excellent dynasty team in Frost Forest? Yu Wenzhou asked. Changing Spring immediately told them the situation for this excellent dynasty team. This was something they had investigated on before. They were clearly substituted players. This is a new server with new players. There's no way those types of players could create such a record, Yu Wenzhou said. That's what I thought as well, Changing Spring said. And these players definitely weren't ordinary. If you look at the record done by Excellent Dynasty done in Boneyard, this just happened to be done around the time we had our match with Excellent Era. Excellent Era's vice-captain Lu Hao made numerous low-leveled mistakes in the match. His condition was strangely bad. It looks like this guy ran to the new server and split his attention onto setting these records, Yu Wenzhou said. No way. For a low-level dungeon like this, shouldn't it be easy for a pro player to set a record? It shouldn't go so far as to affect his performance in the match, right? Changing Spring said. This Boneyard record isn't normal. What do you think, Shaoshan? Yu Wenzhou said. Huang Shaoshan nodded his head. This Boneyard record is no longer a question of skill. It isn't possible to set this record purely on skill. In the new server, there's no way they'd have too many good equipment yet, which means that the only way they'd have been able to improve the record would be to create a strategy more outstanding than previous ones. As expected of Huang Xiao, Changing Spring couldn't help but gasp in astonishment. They had looked over this record who knew how many times, yet they weren't able to be certain about such a conclusion. Perhaps only God-level players with incredible judgment like Huang Shaoshan would dare be so confident in their answer. If you say it like this, then not only was this Excellent Dynasty record substituted in by Lu Hao, he even spent a lot of energy to research a new strategy just for this dungeon. And this was why his condition during the match wasn't good, Changing Spring concluded. I'm afraid it's not just that. This guy might not have researched a new strategy, but rather stole a new strategy, Yu Wenzhou said. What? The record set by the new strategy appeared 3 times. Yu Wenzhou tapped the screen as he said, for 2 teams to have coincidentally come up with the same strategy at the same time? Look at the first record set by Lord Grimm. In this team, there's a player called Hateful Sword, but after this record was beat by Excellent Dynasty, Lord Grimm's team no longer has a Hateful Sword in it, but a player called Flowing Tree instead. These 2 characters are of different classes, but in this dungeon, Blade Masters aren't any stronger than Berserkers. If the Blade Master player was more skilled than the Berserker player, then why didn't they just directly use the Blade Master the first time? So the most likely possibility was that this new strategy was researched by Lord Grimm. This Berserker Hateful Sword was someone from Excellent Dynasty who had gotten into the team. He then went with them to learn the new strategy and then went back to lead Excellent Dynasty's players to set a new record. There was obviously no way Lord Grimm could look for this Hateful Sword's help again, which was why he found this Blade Master, Flowing Tree. Quote. Changing Spring was startled. Yu Wenzhou was able to figure out things he hadn't even thought of before. The time the record came out. Excellent Dynasty's background. The terrible performance of Lu Hao during the match. Yu Wenzhou had noticed so many small details. This Blue Rain team captain wasn't just a person who knew how to keep the team together like those on the outside said. This type of judgment and perception wasn't below Huang Shaoshan's in the slightest. No, he might even be better than Huang Shaoshan in this aspect. At least, at this moment, Huang Shaoshan hadn't made such a deduction. Team captain, you've got to be exaggerating. This sounds like a plot from some fiction novel. Not only did he not make the deduction, Huang Shaoshan even doubted Yu Wenzhou's deduction. Could Lu Hao have gone crazy? He would actually put in so much effort for a dungeon in a new server? How could Huang Shaoshan only have said that? He had to keep going. Ha ha, that's certainly true. That's why there might be some other special reason that made him place so much importance onto this record. He had directly competed against Lord Grimm for Frost Forest. After that, he even infiltrated Lord Grimm's team to spy on them. It seems like he also places a lot of importance on this Lord Grimm. To be able to make a pro player think of him as an enemy, this Lord Grimm definitely isn't any weaker than him. I have a feeling that Lu Hao is well aware who Lord Grimm is. His hostile actions seem to be concealing his fear, acknowledgement, and trust. Because of this fear, he ran to spy on them. Because of his acknowledgement, he stole his strategy and directly used it. because of his trust, he trusted that the strategy being used was already the most optimal choice. There wouldn't be any strategy better than it. Quote. Changing Spring's jaw dropped in astonishment. To be able to make an analysis to such an extent? He couldn't help but look at Huang Shaoxun, who was also listening. He realized that Huang Shaoxun wasn't amazed in the slightest at this. He seemed as calm as ever. He really is Huang Xiao, Changing Spring once again gasped. Perhaps there were many who felt like Huang Shaoxun wasn't calm enough due to his constant chatter. However, in reality, as the most outstanding player in seizing opportunities, Huang Shaoxun was completely calm on the inside. Only with this inner calmness was he able to possess such keen awareness of the battlefield and find the most optimal opportunity to strike. That's why I think that if we want to know who Lord Grimm is, then we should just directly call Lu Hao and ask him. Lu Hao's phone number, I should have it. Yu Wenzhou smiled, but then quickly followed, oh, I didn't bring my cell phone with me. They weren't allowed to bring their cell phones into the practice room. This was a rule that a lot of clubs had. Changing Spring looked forward to it. He looked forward to knowing the answer. He obviously hoped that Yu Wenzhou would be a bit more active. But seeing that Yu Wenzhou didn't have his cell phone and didn't intend on going to get it, Changing Spring felt somewhat disappointed. He didn't dare urge the team captain, but at this moment, maybe he could ask. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Yu Wenzhou patted his pocket and laughed. Actually, someone who Lu Hao was enemies with, was scared of, was acknowledged by, and trusted. There's no need to ask. I already know who he is. Quote. Who is he? Changing Spring blurted out. Yi Chu, Yu Wenzhou said. God, Yi Chu. Changing Spring didn't know what to do to express his astonishment. Shaoxun, have you talked to Yi Chu recently? Yu Wenzhou asked. Nope, after that guy retired, he just seemed to have evaporated. Maybe he was kidnapped by aliens, Huang Shaoxun said. He doesn't use cell phones, right? Yu Wenzhou said. Yeah. It looks like he was kidnapped by aliens to the 10th server to continue playing Glory. Unspecialized Lord Grimham? We might even see him appear in a match again someday, Yu Wenzhou said. Changing Spring had many things he wanted to say, but didn't know how to start. Yu Wenzhou and Huang Shaoxun didn't seem to have any reaction to such a conclusion. After a few moments of thinking, Yu Wenzhou lifted his head and looked up at the clock on the wall of the practice room. He suddenly stood up. It's time to eat, Yu Wenzhou said. Yeah, it's time to eat, it's time to eat. Come with us, Changing Spring. Do you know where the cafeteria is? I'll bring you there. Huang Shaoxun put his arm around Changing Spring and dragged him out. Chapter 184, That's a Strength Too? The club's food was quite delicious, and for team members, the food was free. Of course, other club staff could come and eat as well, but they didn't get to enjoy the same benefits as the team members. Changing Spring didn't have those benefits either. However, he followed Huang Shaoxun and used his status to get in for free. It was just that he was practically unable to taste the food that went into his mouth. Changing Spring's mind was still on what Yu Wenzhou had analyzed earlier. Lord Grimm is God Yi Chu. This news took a long time for Changing Spring to digest, at least, when compared to his dinner. In his heart, whether it was him or Blue River, they had already respected Lord Grimm. They had recognized that he had a very high skill level, but they had never expected such an outcome. Yi Chu, that was a power at the very peak of glory. Even though he was retired now, he was still more than enough to tidy up whatever he wanted in game. This could be seen just by how easily Poplar Beach had been tidied up. If this had taken place during God Yi Chu's prime with his Battle God 1 Autumn Leaf, who knew how terrible Poplar Beach would have been crushed? Changing Spring originally had a few methods he planned on using to fight against Lord Grimm, but after knowing his identity, his heart suddenly dropped. What should he do now? Changing Spring felt that the food in front of him tasted like wax. Sitting at the same table were Yu Wenzhou and Huang Shaoxun, but the two were casually chatting with each other. They didn't seem very surprised about Yi Chu. After all, after thinking about it, they were pro players as well, so there wasn't anything too surprising. Yi Chu had retired, but what was wrong with returning to the game to play? It only affected normal players, who would feel somewhat pressured by God competing with them. After eating, he decided to leave. Yu Wenzhou and Huang Shaoxian didn't mention Yi Chu again. Yu Wenzhou was still as friendly as ever and even accompanied him out, but when they parted, he said a few final words, that Lord Grimm, especially his weapon, try and pay more attention to it please. Ah. Oh, with this sudden mention of Lord Grimm, Changing Spring finally responded. In theory, the team captain didn't have any power over Changing Spring for in-game guild matters. However, everyone knew that pro players were the core of the club. Who wouldn't take what they said seriously? Changing Spring placed importance on what Yu Wenzhou requested. I'll be going then, Changing Spring said and then left. After turning around, Yu Wenzhou saw Huang Shaoxian going back to his room and immediately called for him. What do you want? Huang Shaoxian replied. Yu Wenzhou walked over and went into Huang Shaoxian's room along with him. What commands do you have, Captain? Huang Shaoxian asked. Yu Wenzhou stood beside a table. He grabbed a pen on the table and began playing with it. Last time, when we had the match versus Excellent Era, if I remember correctly, you left at night to do something? Huh? There was something like that? That day? Let me think, Huang Shaoxian said. Was it to go and meet with Yi Chu? Yu Wenzhou asked. Not a peep came out of Huang Shaoxian. The time you left matches the time when that record was set. The blade master on that team, Flowing Tree, was you, right? Yu Wenzhou said. Flowing Tree? Yeah, that name does sound a bit familiar. How could that be? How strange, Huang Shaoxian said. Haha, Yu Wenzhou laughed. He didn't comment on Huang Shaoxian's acting and followed, what type of weapon is Yi Chu's unspecialized weapon? Huang Shaoxian's expression immediately turned serious. Without a doubt, it's just like I said before, it's a weapon specially made for unspecialized characters. The attack? Definitely silver weapon level. Are there any special attributes? I couldn't tell. It doesn't look like it has any. Its attack speed? It has the same attack speed for every form. It should have an attack speed of 5. What forms does it have? From what I've seen, he can use skills from every class, Huang Shaoxian said. The level? He probably knows how to upgrade it, Huang Shaoxian said. This type of weapon paired with Yi Chu. It looks like we'll get a chance to see a true unspecialized, Yu Wenzhou said with lament. But it'll have to be at least a year later, Huang Shaoxian said. Unspecialized huh? Yu Wenzhou looked out the window as if in deep thought. Glory 10th server. Changing Spring immediately returned to log into the game. Chilling Nightfall, Flying Brushstroke, and the others hadn't returned to the Heavenly Domain yet. They were still using the accounts they had borrowed and were waiting for Changing Spring to return with the news. Blue Brook Guild's 5 great experts gathered together once again, along with Blue River's right-hand man, Boundboat. What did they say? After seeing Changing Spring, they immediately asked him. Changing Spring let out a sigh. He had been shocked already. It was their turn now. Captain Yu figured out who Lord Grimm is, Changing Spring said. Who is he? Everyone asked. Yi Chu, Changing Spring pretended to be calm when he said this. What? Everyone acted as if they hadn't heard clearly. Yi Chu. Battle God One Autumn Leaf, that Yi Chu, Changing Spring said. No way, Flying Brushstroke yelled out in astonishment. Who was Lord Grimm? This was a question they had discussed numerous times ever since they had learned about him. But even their most outrageous speculations couldn't compare to the truth. Lord Grimm was actually God Yi Chu. Blue River didn't know why, but he felt somewhat excited. Even though Huang Shaoxian was his favorite pro player, the mysterious God Yi Chu was someone who was worthy of worshipping as well. Seeing Lord Grimm on his friends list, Blue River couldn't help but feel like saying a few words to him. At this moment, he had already forgotten that he was the main reason that caused them so much trouble in the 10th server. So he was actually God Yi Chu all along. I never would have thought of that. What should we do then? Luckily, Bound Boat was there. This issue pulled Blue River back in. God Yi Chu would be a difficult opponent. Blue River was finally aware of the cruel reality. However, if it was because they were against God Yi Chu, then retreating wouldn't be shameful, right? Blue River suddenly felt a lot more relaxed. At this moment, Changing Spring began to talk. Even though we know that our opponent is God Yi Chu, there's no change in plans. We just have to understand how grim our circumstances are. Against God Yi Chu, there's nothing we can do about setting the records on how we're going to fight against him. This isn't a matter for our Blue Brook Guild. The ambitious and able guilds in the 10th server will need to rally together. Even if it's for giving materials, we should still rally. Changing Spring's final words made even himself not know whether to laugh or cry. I think if everyone knows that he's God Yi Chu, then there wouldn't be any more pointless fights, Blue River said. The problem is, we all believe this, but if you say this to the other guilds, will they believe us? Changing Spring asked. Everyone was silent. They understood how suspicious and cautious other guilds were towards each other. Since it turned out to be like this, why don't we think about this some more? If we know Lord Grimm's identity, is there any way we can use this to our advantage? Changing Spring said. The rest will depend on what Blue Bridge decides to do. Changing Spring suddenly changed the topic. Me? Right. After all, these are all 10th server matters, Changing Spring said. Right. Blue Bridge, you can do it, Flying Brushstroke said. To have God Yi Chu as an opponent, it was nice knowing you, Chilling Nightfall said. We've got nothing else to do, so we'll be going back first, Dawn of Ice said. Yeah, you guys can go back, Changing Spring answered. Moonlight Forest hasn't been run yet, right? Not yet. Okay, we'll run it tonight. Should we go now? Let's go. Blue Bridge, good luck. Remember to pay attention to Lord Grimm's weapon, Changing Spring urged. F***CK. You guys, Blue River hadn't finished, when the four went offline one after another. These guys are too irresponsible, Blue Bridge was speechless. As soon as these guys saw that the 10th server's difficult problem was because of God Yi Chu, they all acted as if there was nothing wrong and all ran off. Bound Boat could only force a smile. What do you think we should do? Blue River asked. Actually, the guild leaders already told us what we can do, Bound Boat said. Oh. Knowing Lord Grimm's identity is the one thing we can use, Bound Boat said. Why do I think that all that gives us is more pressure? Blue River said. Pressure can be used. Other guilds might not have this type of pressure, so they'll still face him directly. As for us, we'll have to be more careful. We won't try this sort of thing anymore. We'll see if we can take advantage of what others do, Bound Boat said. Whoa, if you say it like this, then you're saying, we should run away from battles against God Yi Chu and sit back and watch God Yi Chu clean up these other arrogant guys, Blue River said. I think that's what the guild leader was saying, Bound Boat said. That's the only thing that can be done, Blue River thought. Was that an advantage? It sounds like we are killing the other guilds with a borrowed knife. But in reality, the knife did whatever it wanted to and we can only follow it with our tail tucked between our legs and pick up the leftovers. Next up is Line Canyon. What do you think Tyrannical Ambition will do? Bound Boat said, but he didn't hear Blue River respond. Are you there? Bound Boat asked. I say, Blue River was still here. What? If I go ask Lord Grimm for a signature, would that be bad? F***CK, what a loser. Even though he's God Yi Chu, he's also a difficult opponent for us, Bound Boat said. Yeah, that's what I think too. It's too shameful, Blue River said. Bound Boat was speechless. Chapter 185, it's unfortunate that his hands are handicapped. Lord Grimm was Yi Chu. The tremors brought by this were minimal. Blue River and Bound Boat were the only two who knew of this in the 10th server's Blue Brook Guild. After discussing it, the two decided to keep this a secret. The guilds who didn't know this would continue fighting against Lord Grimm. standing on the sidelines and watching them strike at a stone with eggs. What was wrong with that? Blue River stopped playing and instead went to the forums to enjoy the videos of Poplar Beach getting destroyed. Poplar Beach's name was very distinct. Even though Poplar Beach always made Blue River resentful, Poplar Beach was, after all, a relatively famous player in the game and was one of their Blue Brook Guild's experts. Being crushed like this didn't only embarrass himself, but the Blue Brook Guild as well. The players from the enemy guilds would surely use this to laugh at Blue Brook Guild. The reason Blue River was on the forums was because this video had been posted on one of the categories in the forum, Heavenly Domain. There was a heavenly domain in the game. There was a heavenly domain in the forums. These two heavenly domains were both places bustling with noise. These heavenly domain people clearly didn't harbor any good intentions. In the comments, they praised the exceptional skill of chasing haze on the surface, but their main way of doing so was by using Poplar Beach as the center. Does everyone know who Poplar Beach is? He's an expert who's not any weaker than Blue Brook Guild's 5 great experts. But to have been beaten like this by chasing haze, how skilled do you think this chasing haze is? This was more or less the method they used. Blue River looked at the later comments. These people's plots had succeeded. There were many who were looking down and laughing at Poplar Beach. Speaking of this, it was mostly because Poplar Beach's reputation wasn't good. He had made a name for himself in the heavenly domain through his arrogance. His fall caused many players to attack him like a dead dog. Many of these attacks brought Blue Brook Guild along with him, which made Blue River extremely unhappy. This video had already exploded into popularity. Those, in the heavenly domain and the other servers, who didn't understand the dispute in the 10th server had already found chasing haze in-game. That day at dinner, Chen Guo scolded Yi Shu for quite a lengthy amount of time. She practically couldn't play the game anymore. Her in-game friends were all asking her how she suddenly becomes so good. She was only able to explain it to them one by one, which was already annoying enough. But her friends continued to bother her by asking which expert had borrowed the account. Besides this, there were also numerous strangers who asked her to mentor them. There were random guilds pestering her to join their guilds too. Even weirder was that in the afternoon, there were 2 people who claimed they were pro-player scouts. They asked her as if she were under an interrogation how old she was, how long she had played Glory, where she was from, and whether she had any interest in becoming a pro player. This made Chen Guo so angry that she returned with an "I'm not the account's owner" and then logged out of the game. Thinking about how she had actually said, "I'm not the account's owner," Chen Guo felt sad. "It's all because of you," Chen Guo shouted. The rice in her mouth almost sprayed onto Yishu's face. My bad, my bad. Boss, you should drink some soup. Don't choke." Yishu immediately handed a bowl of soup over to Chen Guo. Chen Guo took it and drank 2 sips. Her anger receded a bit. "Actually, you can't completely blame this on me," Yishu took the opportunity to explain. The opponent was too weak. Get the F***ck out of here," Chen Guo's soup splashed. Amongst everyone's cries of fear, Yishu swiftly slipped out of the internet cafe. "And you're laughing, little Tang," Chen Guo said angrily. Tang Ru ate her dinner behind the reception desk. As of right now she was carrying her lunchbox. Even though her back was facing Chen Guo, her shoulders were moving up and down. She was clearly laughing uncontrollably. "I'm not laughing." Tang Ru quickly stuffed rice into her mouth to try and stifle her laughter. Yishu had run out, but hadn't come back. At 9 o'clock, Chen Guo ran out of the internet cafe to look around, but didn't see him coming back, so she returned and muttered to Tang Ru, "Where'd he run off to? Could he have crashed into a tree?" "If that happened, then I'm sure you'd be happy," Tang Ru said. "Yeah, I'd be really happy," Chen Guo said as she continued to glance outside repeatedly. "What are you doing?" Seeing that Tang Ru wasn't busy at the front desk, she stretched her neck to look inside and saw Tang Ru studying a guide again. Chen Guo was helpless. "Should I go find a random open computer and play? I tried it before, but it was still so noisy." Maybe I should go look at a guide or watch a video? Chen Guo opened up a web page and saw that the lead story was a video and analysis of Poplar Beach getting crushed by chasing haze. Chen Guo couldn't resist clicking on it and playing it over and over again. The time was nearing 11, but there was still no sign of Yi Shu. Where'd this guy go? He doesn't have a phone either. Chen Guo went in and out of the cafe. Relax. He's an adult, Tang Ru said. A shut-in. He probably ran far away and got lost, Chen Guo said. Even if he's lost, there's still the police. Don't worry about him, Tang Ru said. Who's worrying about him? It's almost 11 o'clock already. If he doesn't come back soon, then what about the night shift? Chen Guo said. Aren't I still here? Tang Ru said. You should go to sleep. Okay, Chen Guo looked outside once again, but finally went up the stairs. If he comes back, should I send you a text? Tang Ru asked. Okay, Chen Guo answered and went up. Not long after Chen Guo left, the employees who got off at 11 all left. At this moment, Yi Shu appeared at the entrance of the internet cafe like a ghost. After looking inside, he creeped up to the reception desk. Once he saw that only Tang Ru was there, he relaxed. Where's the boss? Yi Shu stood straight and lit up a cigarette. She went to sleep. When Tang Ru saw Yi Shu, after answering him, she took out her cell phone. Where'd you run off to? Tang Ru asked Yi Shu as she sent a text to Chen Guo. I just took a stroll around the area. Out of 100, how many points is boss's anger worth now? Yi Shu asked. Hard to say. When you weren't here, she was at a 0. But now that you're here, she's probably at a 100 again, Tang Ru said. It really wasn't my fault, Yi Shu said. But you're such a taunter, Tang Ru said. This sister had already begun using a few gaming terms in real life. After typing out the text, she pressed send. Her phone quickly rang. Tang Ru opened it and chuckled. Boss said that you were late, so there won't be any pay for today. Tang Ru showed Yi Shu the text. Fine. It doesn't matter if I don't get pay as long as I have food and shelter, Yi Shu said. Should I reply with what you said? Tang Ru asked. Don't you dare, Yi Shu was speechless. Ha ha, you should come in. I'm going over there. Tang Ru got up and gave her seat at the front desk to Yi Shu. She went to her usual all-nighter seat. The two logged into the game. Just as Yi Shu logged into Lord Grimm, he received a message, you've been exposed. Yi Shu was puzzled. He replied, who are you? FCK. It's me, Shaoshan. Huang Shaoshan was sad. Oh, it's you? Yi Shu thought of Flowing Tree, that low-leveled account that Huang Shaoshan had used. What's been exposed? Yi Shu asked. Your records were too astonishing. Blue Brook Guild even came by today to look for the team for help. I'm sure you know how amazing our team captain is. In just a few moments, he deduced that you were Lord Grimm, Huang Shaoshan replied. Oh, how'd he deduce it? Yi Shu asked. The process would clearly take a long time, but who was Huang Shaoshan? He could be afraid of anything else, but he wasn't afraid of talking too much. His hands moved swiftly as he quickly narrated the entire process to Yi Shu. Oh, so it was like that. But if I've been exposed, there's nowhere for you to hide either, Yi Shu said. Yeah, he also deduced that I was Flowing Tree, Huang Shaoshan said. Tisk tisk, Wenzhou really is quite amazing. It's just too bad that his hand is handicapped, Yi Shu said. He's standing right behind me, Huang Shaoshan replied. Then his hand isn't handicapped, Yi Shu said. Captain, Huang Shaoshan turned his head to look at Yu Wenzhou with an innocent expression. Yu Wenzhou only laughed, it's the truth. My hands really are handicapped. Your trash talk has no effect on our team captain, Huang Shaoshan replied. Yeah, that's why I said he's amazing. If his hands weren't handicapped, then he really would be an extremely difficult opponent to deal with, Yi Shu said. Huang Shaoshan was helpless and turned his head to Yu Wenzhou. The handicapped person would like to compare notes with him. Ask him if he wants to come, Yu Wenzhou laughed. Huang Shaoshan conveyed the message. Yishu quickly replied, come. Which account? I'll just use this one. After a short moment, the reply came. Oh, you've already switched? Yishu asked. Yeah. Free field, whoever gets there first makes the room, Yishu said. Room 45178, password 159, Yu Wenzhou replied. How long have you been waiting? Yishu replied. His Lord Grimm hastily rushed towards the arena. Enter, ready, begin. The map was the most common small ring. Flowing Tree stood at one corner. Hi, after Lord Grimm entered, Yishu greeted. Hi, I heard you're a manager at an internet cafe now, Yu Wenzhou replied. The character Flowing Tree drew his sword and rushed forward. Yeah. For people like us, besides playing games, what else can we do? Yishu laughed. Lord Grimm also swung his myriad manifestation umbrella. The umbrella transformed into the battle lance form. After dodging the attack, he stabbed forward with his lance. A battle lance with an attack speed of 5, how difficult to deal with. Even your evil annihilation didn't have that high of an attack speed, right? Yu Wenzhou said. It's just plain stats. Yishu's hands hadn't stopped. He followed up with a few skills as well as a few normal attacks. Yu Wenzhou's Flowing Tree dodged left and right. There wasn't any chance for him to counter-attack. Are you preparing to return with an unspecialized? Yu Wenzhou was still talking. I hope this time the company won't mess things up, Yishu said. Haha, good luck. I need luck to beat you, Yishu laughed. Sometimes, I really admire you guys with your crazy hand speeds, Yu Wenzhou regretted. Because his Flowing Tree wasn't able to keep up, he was finally hit under Lord Grimm's relentless attacks. If you also had this type of hand speed, how could there be any contest? Yishu wasn't polite though and continued to attack.